Hare Krishna, and welcome to this week's virtual Sunday feast here at ISKCON Chicago on behalf of Sri Sri Kishore Kishori and Srila Prabhupada. A big welcome. Before I turn it over to tonight's guest speaker, a few quick announcements. The first is, if you have not registered for the virtual winter retreat, please do so. The theme is gratitude during difficult times. So that's a fantastic topic that's especially relevant as we're going between Thanksgiving and the holiday season, and the topic of gratitude appears everywhere. But there's so much difficulty just around the world right now. So how do we keep that spirit of gratitude alive, especially in these most trying times? So for hearing more about that topic, registration is open. There's a link through the ISKCON Chicago email, as well as on iskonchicago.com. Also, I'm very happy to announce that this week, ISKCON Chicago will be launching an e-commerce page where you can get your 2021 ISKCON Chicago calendars with dates, times, and fantastic images. I'll personally attest, but more to come on that that will be communicated. But the calendars for 2021 are happening and will be available starting this week. Finally, I'll turn it over to tonight's speaker, His Grace Deva Madhava Prabhu, who's going to be continuing our Brilliant as the Sun series by taking us through Srimad-Bhagavatam, 2nd Canto, Chapter 9. And he's titled his topic, The Power of Penance. And for those of you not familiar with Deva Madhava Prabhu, he hails most recently from Ypsilanti, Michigan, where he is the director of the Harmony Collective, which is a combination outreach and in-reach facility with some very innovative programs, which maybe he'll share a little bit about if anyone asks the questions. But they're really fascinating ways to not only attract people to Krishna consciousness, but also help devotees once they're engaged in the movement, which is a fantastic service. So thank you again for saying yes to this invitation, and looking forward to your speak.
Thank you, Yashoda Prabhu. Always really happy and humbled to be with the family of Sri Kishore Kishori, their servants. So I hope everyone is doing well. This is obviously not the usual circumstance that we find ourselves in, or that I enjoy having your association, but I'm glad to have it in some way or other nonetheless. And I was really excited when Yashoda Prabhu told me about this particular approach that you guys are taking to your Sunday feast, a kind of summary study of the Bhagavatam and going chapter to chapter. I was really excited until he told me what chapter I would be trying to summarize, because I was given the onerous he came back on screen to give me to laugh along with my plight here. He gave me the onerous task of summarizing the chapter in which the entirety of the Bhagavatam is an expansion of. For those of you that have studied it before, the 9th chapter of the 2nd canto is what I've been asked to discuss today. And it's such a tremendous section of the book, because this is in fact where Srimad-Bhagavatam is delivered into the heart of Lord Brahma by Krishna, by Vishnu. And that deliverance of what's known as the Chatur Sloki, the 4 core verses of the Srimad-Bhagavatam, are the kind of bija, or the seed, that then sprouts into the entirety of the rest of the Bhagavatam, which is kind of a commentary on these 4 verses. So to summarize the entirety of the Bhagavatam is what I've been charged to do this evening. So rather than make an attempt to do that, which no one should do, but anyway, I especially should not do, I'm going to just go through a few key verses there from the chapter that stood out to me in my rereading of it, my restudying of it. And as many of you hopefully have experienced, the Shastra's ever fresh. So each time you study, something else might click or something else might key in. So please know this is just my own meager, humble analysis this time around. It's by no means a comprehensive study of especially this chapter. And we'll look at those Chatur Sloki verses, especially those 4 verses towards the end of the chapter, and try to understand something. My hope is to express my own experience and speak to Srila Prabhupada's commentary around how we ourselves can realize what it is that we're hearing and reading and studying, not only in this chapter, but in our reading of the Bhagavatam in general, and indeed in our practice of Krishna consciousness. How can I really taste this? How can I get the experience that Lord Brahma is having here, which is a wonderful one? It's an astounding one. It's a mystic one, and we should want that. We should allow ourselves to desire to have the same. So that's my hope this evening, is our conversation together can churn that hope in each of our hearts, that we allow ourselves to want, to hope, to even expect that we have the benediction that Lord Brahma receives in this chapter. So if you would allow me, I'll begin with a few invocation verses, and if you know them, please join at home and chant along with me. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Narum Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Udhirayet Nasta Prayesto Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttamashloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtaki Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Shri Chaitanya Prasadena Tadrupasya Vinirnayam Malapikurate Shastram Drisra Vraja Velasani. So I can't see exactly who is and isn't listening. This, one of the many limitations here, so please forgive me. But I ask the blessings of all the devotees there who are hearing in whatever capacity, wherever you are, and appreciate your taking the time, the austerity, to click the button and open the box and jump into yet another online Sangha. It can be even more tiring, actually, than to go to a physical place to get on the Zoom or get on YouTube or Facebook or wherever we are again. But we know that this is where the nourishment is at right now. So I appreciate everyone for taking on the austerity of hearing in this kind of limited way, and especially from a limited person like myself. But please pray and give me your blessings that something can be said to enliven us all in our hope and search for the experience that Lord Brahma has in this very chapter. So second canto, chapter 9. I'm going to, let me see, share my screen here, right? After months of this, you think I'd be used to it, but I'm still very timid and scared when it comes to dealing with Zoom and such. So Lord Brahma, to set the scene a little bit, what's going on, he's sitting on the lotus, and the environment around him is essentially looking like a vacuum, because as the creator of the universe, he hasn't actually done anything yet to manifest what we now see a very small fraction of, that material energy of the Lord within that little bubble of his jurisdiction, his universe. And so he's sitting there on the lotus, and he's looking around and thinking to himself, this is quite the situation, and I'm not sure what to do with it. And so he's looking down the stem, and he's trying to find out what's happening. And then he hears this famous vibration. He hears the sound, 2 syllables from the Vedic alphabet coming together, the word tapa. And this sound, tapa, comes to him and occurs to him as an instruction after trying to find the source of that sound and where it's come from, and excuse me, if there's anyone else there with him, and he doesn't see any indications of that, but he's heard this sound and what he's taken as an instruction, tapa. And so then there he resolves to sit, and we'll pick up with that kind of scene here with second canto, chapter 9, text 8. And I'll chant the Sanskrit for this particular text just to bring in that transcendental sound vibration. Divyam sahasrabdham amoga darshano jitani latma vijitobhya dendriya atapyata samkila lokatapanam tapas tapiyams tapatam samihita. Lord Brahma underwent penances for 1,000 years by the calculations of the demigods. He heard this transcendental vibration from the sky, again, that vibration being this word tapa, and he accepted it as divine. Thus he controlled, forgive me, let me just shrink there we go. Thus he controlled his mind and senses, and the penances he executed were a great lesson for the living entities. Thus he is known as the greatest of all ascetics. And this great lesson is something that I would like to make the central focus of the discussion of the chapter this evening. Again, because of the nature of this particular chapter, there's many angles in those, especially the chapter Sloki 4 verses. Prabhupada has written practically a book on those 4 in his purports, and the acharyas, of course, have commented extensively on them. So if anything you take from this evening, please, with folded hands, I request you also go read this chapter for yourself and see for yourself what you may take. But I would like to key in on this phrase here that Srila Prabhupada has given us. Thus, he controlled his mind and senses, and the penances he executed were a great lesson for the living entities. The lesson of Lord Brahma's penance and the power of penance. And this sometimes evades us in Krishna consciousness, because we come into Krishna consciousness with material motivations, each one of us, and I'm certainly no exception to that. And on one side, the material motivations are not a problem because the process is made to get rid of them. And so we feel relief, we feel hope, we feel excited, and we even see around us that, okay, so it looks like some people are getting the result, that they're being relieved of their mundane sentiments and their tendencies. And so maybe I can also have the same experience happen to me. If that guy can do it, I can do it. Here at Harmony Collective recently, I was teaching one of the bhaktas to drive, and I was having a conversation with him and asking, so what is your excitement about this? Do you have any fear? Trying to feel out what's his confidence behind the wheel. And he said, no, I'm not worried. If I look at people everywhere and whoever they are, it seems like most everybody can drive. So if they can do it, I can do it. Which was half reassuring and half scary. Because anyone who's ever, if you have a child and you've helped them learn how to drive, it's a real act of surrender. So anyway, I appreciated the sentiment. Like, yeah, they can do it, I can do it. So we look around the society of devotees and we say, they can do it, I can also do it. It seems to be working for someone, and why not me? However, there is a kind of familiarity that seeps into our life after 1 month or 1 year or 1 decade of practicing Krishna consciousness, where we start to take for granted that we know what we're doing and why. And when we begin to take that for granted, I know why I'm practicing Krishna consciousness and I know what it does. When we begin to take those things for granted, that's when we begin to actually lose the connection with the result, which is why we're really here. If we're honest, we're here to be happy. And that's a healthy desire. The rasovaisaha. This is a natural impetus for the living entity. And so it's interesting to talk about penance and happiness in the same conversation. That can only really be done in Krishna consciousness, because all of the penance that everybody else is performing out there in the material energy for a better position at the company, or a higher admission standard into whatever university, or to get the better girl, and so they're pumping all the iron, or they're reading all the books, or they're working all the hours, overtime, whatever it might be. All of that penance is ultimately just feeding their pride, and that pride is pushing them and pulling them further and further away from Krishna, further contributing to the idea which was brought up at the beginning of this chapter, that I and mine are what matters. That's what this world is about, is manipulating I and mine. And the better I am means the more mine I have. This very simplistic idea, reductionist description that the Bhagavatam gives. The Bhagavatam is a wonderful scripture. It reduces the material energy to its most basic and petty of descriptions. This whole world is just operating on I and mine, that people think they're the doer and the controller. That's the reductionist way that it describes all the fancy stuff that we're all fawning over. The name brands and the big vacations and the skyscrapers and the nice zip codes to live in and the luxury cars to drive. They're just reduced down to the kind of pettiest of experiences. And then the spiritual reality is described in great and minute detail. And this description of the spiritual reality is meant to help us feel called to want that. But again, getting to the point of I'm trying to flesh out here is that after being around for a little while and not experiencing directly that highest of things, the mind and the intelligence of the average person, and I'm speaking to myself, especially an average person, the mind and intelligence of an average person begins to co opt our situation, even in the Sangha of devotees, and start to make our lives more about being Krishna comfortable than being Krishna conscious. This is what leaks in, is this hope, this attempt to just be comfortable in the Sangha of devotees, albeit a spiritual community. Our standard of what it means to become successful in that spiritual community starts to look very mundane. Now, let me get a little position, let me get a little influence, let me get a little respect from the people that are there because I've been around this many years. I'm initiated by so and so. I've done this service. I've donated this amount. And so let me get a little bit of that. And let me just sit and let someone bring me my plate of prasadam at the Sunday feast. Let me have a nice spouse who can take care of me and I can take care of them, and we can raise good children who everybody will appreciate because they play great mridanga, or they lead a great kirtan, or they distribute a bunch of books, or they got into a nice school. Our idea of what Krishna consciousness is about begins to become mundane again, if and until and unless we maintain a very deep sense, a very deep need, in fact, of achieving the real goal, the real prayojana, as it's called. Mahaprabhu gave us this paradigm of sambandha, abhideya, and prayojana. That goal, that prayojana, we have to know that the highest thing is the only goal. And if we let anything else become the goal, then we begin to lose the potency of the practice, and we lose the lesson that Lord Brahma is giving us here. Because imagine you're in his situation and you're sitting on this lotus flower and you're literally alone in practically a vacuum. Would you have the determination, the strength to need to find out your purpose within that vacuum? Would you be able to occupy your entire sense of self with the purpose of finding your purpose? Because that was the tapasya that Lord Brahma does. He's not got anything. He doesn't have hot fire to sit himself in. He doesn't have cold water to submerge himself in. He doesn't have snow in the Himalayas to trek around in. He doesn't have fruits and roots and leaves and berries from the forest to eat. His tapasya is to simply want to know his purpose. That's Lord Brahma's tapasya, is to let his mind be focused on nothing but needing to know, why am I here? What am I for? And in this tapasya, in this focus on the true essence of tapa, he attracts the mercy of the Lord. Thus he is known as the greatest of all ascetics. So we'll move to another text. Lord Brahma, thus seeing the personality of Godhead in fullness, was overwhelmed with joy within his heart, and thus in full transcendental love and ecstasy, his eyes filled with tears of love. He thus bowed down before the Lord. That is the way of the highest perfection of the living being, Paramahamsa. So in this verse, and the next section of the chapter, Lord Brahma has done his tapasya, tapa, and he's meditated. And now the fruit of that practice is coming to him. He is having antardarshan of the Lord. Antar means internal, in the heart. And so where is that? It was said, within his heart, was overwhelmed with joy within his heart. And the descriptions, which we're not going to get to today, are of the Vaikuntha planets. And we hear that not as Lord Brahma is not just seeing Krishna in a kind of isolated way. He's not seeing Vishnu isolated, but he's seeing Vishnu in his kingdom. He's seeing Lakshmi serving him. He's seeing various expansions. He's seeing the devotees. He's seeing the palaces and the gems and the jewels and the flowers and the demigod. He's seeing everything. The entourage, as Prabhupada would say, of the Lord. And this is all happening from the TV of his heart, as Prabhupada sometimes says. We want Netflix subscriptions or Amazon Prime or HBO Plus, but the real subscription, the prime time, best deal, always fresh and new programming, is that antardarshan of the Leela of the Lord that's available in the heart for the pure devotee. And Lord Brahma is showing us that this is the goal, and this is the hope also of the tapasya of a bhakti yogi. Lord Brahma, thus seeing the personality of Godhead in his fullness, nothing missing, was overwhelmed with joy within his heart, and thus in full transcendental love and ecstasy, his eyes filled with tears of love. In my trepidation around discussing this topic, and being able to offer something of a comprehensive discussion on the chapter. I was thinking about you devotees in Chicago, particularly because thankfully, I have a relationship with many of you, and each of you inspire me in your service, and especially the kind of, I would say, there's a sense of respect that's there in Chicago, which I admire and hope to bring into our own Harmony Collective community one day. There's a politeness is superficial, so I don't want to say politeness, but there's a sense of respect. At least I see when I come. It's always, rose-colored glasses when you're a visitor. But this is my appreciation, one of the things that I notice in the community there. And so anyway, I was thinking, and this remembrance of my time in Chicago just before I met the devotees came to me. And I happened to be in Chicago just before I met the devotees in Detroit. And I was in Chicago, went back to Detroit, and I was really at a loss in my life. It had become a place where I didn't know where I was, what I was doing, or why. And I didn't want to try anything else out until I got the clear instruction, the clear message of what's it all for. I wasn't willing to do anything else until I understood that. And I was kind of chuckling at my own, in a very small way, being in that similar situation as Lord Brahma found himself in, that until he knew what it's all for, he wasn't willing to investigate or poke around or try to figure anything else out in this very peculiar situation that he found himself in. And each of us need to examine that. We each need to recognize that what brought me to Krishna consciousness, it may have been a decade ago, 2 decades ago, or just a few months ago, but I recognized at some point my awkward situation in this material energy, and I waited then for Krishna to indicate, what's this really about? What's this really for? Even though I didn't know to call him Krishna yet, perhaps, I waited for some indication from outside of this and myself to move me, so that I could, with that assurance, know that what I'm doing matters. And so I was at the Renaissance Center, which is the GM building in Detroit. Some of you have probably seen it, or if you visited here, it's tall, it's black, it's ominous. The GM building, and behind them they have this fountain area. It's park, and people go there and they play. The kids play in the fountain because it's like water that shoots up from the sidewalk, so the kids can run around and the water shoots at different times, and it amuses the kids. So I was just sitting there reading a book that a friend had given me in Chicago, and it was this book from a New Age writer named Eckhart Tolle, or Tolle, some people say. And he's impersonalist, we can call it, Brahmavadi maybe. He doesn't speak against the personal form of Krishna, but he certainly doesn't have a conception of it himself. So anyway, I'd read this kind of Brahmavad thing, and came to a conclusion that, yeah, nothing in this material energy is of any particular value, but still here I am, and I want to do something. I feel like I matter, and I feel like this matters. And this book has helped me recognize that my particular experience doesn't matter, but there is an experience that will give me satisfaction. There is an experience that will give me, and all others, a sense of fulfillment that will last beyond the temporary nature of our physical body. I was getting that sense, but I had no idea how to connect to that experience, how to create that for myself or others day to day, moment to moment. And so there I was watching the kids play, and enjoying the frivolity of the fountain. I was thinking, I don't want to be a child chasing after the, intermittent spurts of sense gratification that pop up in my life. I don't want to be one of the adults either that is just sitting and watching the kids and kind of like, not happy themselves, but at least like just kind of pacified or feeling a sense of like relief for a few moments, but not really enjoying themselves either. I don't want to be either of these. And in that meditation and kind of recognition of the silliness and the futility of what everyone else was doing, this very strong word came into my heart, and it said, serve. Very strong, serve. That was the thing to do. Because here was this Brahmavadi book, don't worry about anything. And I said, okay, well, if I don't want to worry about anything, then what's the next thing that I do? I want to do something. And so into my frame came this idea to serve. I would say, well, so what service can I do? So I just started picking up trash in that park. And I got down on hands and knees, and for 4 hours, I picked up every cigarette butt, every little fleck of candy wrapper, every little club flyer and cigarette pack and little roll of plastic, every little soda bottle cap and beer can tab, every little speck of anything that I could find in the grass that was there, I picked it up. And people started noticing me and they started moving out of the way and that kind of thing. It was very funny. But after 4 hours, I stood up and I felt very satisfied. I knew all the dirt had been cleansed from at least this one little place. But then I looked out at the whole city and I thought, oh boy, I've got a lot of work cut out for me. So I tapped into this sense of do some service, but then at the same time, there was this very overwhelming sense that there's too much service to do in this material energy. There's too many things to clean up. There's too many people to help. And in that feeling of being humbled at wanting to give something, but not having anything of real value to offer, but knowing that whatever my life was going to be about, it was going to be about giving, I met the devotees just 2 days later. So I share that story to help instigate inside of each of you a remembrance of the time when you were sitting there like Lord Brahma on the lotus. And we might say, well, I've never done that. I've never sat on a giant flower in the vacuum of eternal space. But you have felt yourself in a vacuum of eternal space in this material energy, recognizing its futility. You have had a deep sense that you are about something more than the humdrum of the everyday. And that is the sense of purpose that you need to get back to in order to be able to do the kind of tapasya that it takes to experience the result, the prayojana, that Lord Brahma is feeling right now. Lord Brahma is literally seeing in his heart the spiritual world. And the qualification to experience that only comes to one who has the determination to get there. So we're going to move through a few verses now. The highest perfectional ingenuity is the personal perception of my abodes, and this has been possible because of your submissive attitude in the performance of severe penance according to my order. O sinless Brahma, you may know from me that it was I who first ordered you to undergo penance when you were perplexed in your duty. Such penance is my heart and soul, and therefore penance and I are non-different. This is exciting. Penance and Krishna are non-different. Purport from Srila Prabhupada. I'll offer a section. One who wants to remain here in the material world for material enjoyment has no business entering into the eternal kingdom of God. The Lord favors such a foolish devotee by snatching all that they may possess in the material world. If such a foolish devotee of the Lord tries to recoup their position, then the merciful Lord again snatches away all that they may have possessed. By such repeated failures in material prosperity, they become very unpopular with their family, members, and friends. In the material world, the family members and friends honor persons who are very successful in accumulating wealth by any means. The foolish devotee of the Lord thus put into forcible penance by the grace of the Lord, and at the end, the devotee becomes perfectly happy, being engaged in the service of the Lord. So Prabhupada's explaining in the purport that like it or not, you're going to have to go through pain. You're going to have to be in an uncomfortable situation in this material energy so that eventually you develop the determination and the desire to be done with it. Janma karma cha me divyam yaktva deham punarjanma naitimam eti sorjuna. Understand my appearance and activities. When you give up this body, then you won't have to deal with the transient nature and the violent nature of this material energy anymore. You will attain my spiritual abode, O Arjuna, Krishna says famously, chapter 4, text 9 of Gita. So Prabhupada's explaining, to develop that desire to have that experience, you will have to be put through trouble, one way or the other. You either volunteer for the trouble or the trouble will come to find you. So ask ourselves right now, and am I in that category where I'm seeking out strategically that pain which is going to bring me real pleasure sooner than later? Or am I just being a victim of Krishna consciousness and allowing the process to kind of assault me and begrudgingly being dragged slowly by Guru and Gauranga into the light? Where are we at personally in our own Krishna consciousness? This is something that we want to ask ourselves. Are we one of these foolish devotees that Srila Prabhupada is describing, or are we intelligent and looking for opportunities to offer penance and do service and sacrifice? I'll finish Prabhupada's excerpt here. Therefore, penance and devotional service of the Lord, either by voluntary submission or by being forced by the Lord, is necessary for attaining perfection. And thus such penance is the internal potency of the Lord. That means Srimati Radharani is heading up this effort. The internal potency of the Lord. This is Bhakti Devi. This is devotional service. And it's interesting that we use this word yagya, right? We say the Sankirtan yagya is that which can give ananda buddhi vardhanam, right? Ananda, eternal bliss is brought about by sacrifice. So it's an interesting phrasing, because when we think of sacrifice, we think of something unpleasant. A sacrifice is something difficult to do. And on the condition level where we are right now, for most of us, it is a sacrifice to be hearing the Srimad-Bhagavatam rather than scrolling Facebook, Instagram, or Netflix. Perhaps some of you are doing both right now. But to really give our attention to our rounds, to give our attention to the Bhagavatam, to give our attention to our service, it's a sacrifice. We have to intellectually tell ourselves this is good and that is bad. But when we're really tasting the experience of Krishna consciousness, what is the question of sacrifice? The difficulty for someone who's advanced, like it said on the stage of a Sakti, to not have Krishna directly present, to not be involved in some hearing, some chanting, some service explicitly, for someone on the stage of a Sakti is disturbing. It grates on them. It's like an alcoholic who isn't having a drink after a few minutes or a few hours. They need it. If they don't have it, they go into fits in the thought that they won't get it again. The thought that they won't get Krishna again sends the person into an experience of Krishna on the advanced stage. Are we there yet? Probably not. Maybe some of us are. We're trending that way. But at our present position, recognizing this dynamic, that sacrifice means something difficult. And if it's difficult, it probably means it's good for me. There's a saying, one of the devotees at the Harinam ashram used to say, if you don't want to do it, that's the first sign you should. The first sign that something is healthy for us in Krishna consciousness is that we don't like it. Wake up early. Distribute Srila Prabhupada's books to strangers on the street and ask them for a donation. Sing loudly on the streets in front of strangers that you've never met before. These things are uncomfortable. They grate on certain parts of not us, but our false ego. And so that's how the sacrifice is very helpful in identifying different elements of our not self that we've been identifying with as our real self since time immemorial. It's like pain points. The doctor, if you go to visit the doctor, they poke you and they prod you and they move the stethoscope around, breathe here, knock there, and tell me how it feels. Does it hurt when I press there? Does it hurt when I twist this? How does your breath sound as you're inhaling in and out? Now let me check in the back. How does your breath sound? Now let me check closer to the throat. And they're listening for inconsistencies and they're waiting for you to tell, oh, that does hurt. Oh, that doesn't feel so good. Oh, my knee doesn't bend that way. Oh, I don't have that range of motion. And then that indicates an issue. So when we are engaged in devotional service and a kind of ugly emotion comes up, a kind of aversion, or we say anarta, when these unbecoming experiences are present in our Krishna consciousness, it's actually an opportunity to isolate, to identify a problem. X marks the spot. And so these pain points, which are identified in our yajna, in our sacrifice, I have a hard time getting up. I don't like it when people don't give me credit. I don't like it when somebody tells me what to do. These are all very helpful things to recognize so that we can root them out, as Mahaprabhu tells in Rupa Shiksha in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. We learn to root out the weeds while simultaneously watering the Bhakti Lata Bij. And if we're proactive in both weeding out and doing the watering, then very quickly we're going to feel the fruit of Krishna consciousness. But if we're lazy, then anyone who's done some gardening, all of you are there in Chicago, and so in the city, sometimes you don't have the opportunity to garden so much, but hopefully you've gotten a little plot or a little flower box somewhere. The plants you don't want to grow always grow quicker than the plants that you do want to grow. It takes the plants you do want to grow 3, 4, 10 years sometimes before they flower and they fruit in the way that you're hoping. But the weeds, they'll grow taller than your head in the first 6 months. And if you let them stick around for 2 or 3 years, they take over the entire garden. So the anartas, they move quick. And we have to be diligent and quick about identifying and weeding them out. And so our aversion to the yajna, our aversion to service, our unwillingness to perform penance is actually a helpful indicator in our Krishna consciousness. If we seek that out, those pain points, and then follow through and say, no, I'm actually going to do it. I'm going to step up to the plate. I'm going to follow through. Then that simultaneously pulls out that ugly thing and waters the good thing. Okay, moving on. And if there are any comments or questions, I'm not sure exactly the system that devotees have for bringing those out on this forum here in Chicago, but please, by all means, offer them, and I'll be leaving at least 15 minutes, if not more, to be able to get to those. I create this cosmos by such penance. I maintain it by the same energy, and I withdraw it all by the same energy. Therefore, the potency is penance only. So in the interest of time, I'm going to read half of what I intended. An easygoing life and attainment of perfection and transcendental realization cannot go together. Oh, it hurts. We should read it again. An easygoing life and attainment of perfection in transcendental realization cannot go together. Prabhupada is telling us the goal is not Krishna comfortable. The goal is not a peaceful mind. The goal is not well-behaved children. The goal is not happy husband and wife relations in and of it themselves. All of these are symptoms of something much deeper happening when we're talking about Krishna consciousness. It's not about Krishna comfortable. An easygoing life and attainment of perfection and transcendental realization cannot go together. The Lord is more clever than any living entity. Therefore, he wants to see how painstaking the devotee is in devotional service. Are you putting in the work? Are you really struggling? Yugal Kishore Prabhu, I think many of you devotees may know him. He's a saintly brahmachari here in Detroit area. He has the Farmington Hills Temple. And I remember he said once in a Bhagavatam class, the Lord wants to see you struggle. The Lord wants to see how much you want it. He wants to, are you going the extra mile? Are you willing to give up even that for him? Even that, yes, that too. Are you willing to give it up for him? I went through a very difficult experience a few years ago where my mom and she passed away, and my first wife left me, and my grandmother passed away, kind of all in the span of a month and a half. And a lot was being ripped out, and a lot of pain was being felt. And even that, am I willing to stick with it and go to Krishna and the devotees and try to do some service? Or now do I go somewhere else and do I take shelter of other things? And I guess I could say grateful and proud to say, for the most part, I stuck with the right part of the process. And here I am today, happy and fulfilled and better off for those apparently difficult situations, those apparently unfair and violent circumstances. I'm better off for them today because I was able to find Krishna within them. And we're getting to Krishna saying that in the Chatur Sloki. This is his penultimate statement there. But to Prabhupada's point earlier, either I seek that discomfort myself or Krishna is going to create it for me. And one of the lessons, especially in my disconnect from my first wife, is that I could see there was a lot of behaviors and responsibilities that I hadn't lived up to as a husband in a Krishna conscious family yet. And because I was avoiding those tapasyas then, I got put through some tapasya later. And it hurt a lot more, and it felt it was a lot more shocking and jarring, and it took a lot. It also damaged other people in the process because it wasn't done by me in a wholesome way. And so then having to go through it the hard way is the hard way. And why not go the easy way if we can? So that's what I'm advocating tonight, is that we begin to learn how to look for the penance. We begin to learn to look for the opportunity to sacrifice and to serve, staving off the inevitable, which is that Krishna is going to put us through the sauce, through the ringer, if we don't put ourselves through the ringer first. So I'm remarried and happily, and things are going very wonderfully partly because of the hard lessons I learned there. And my brother-in-law, his name is Balaram, and he went to the Gurukul in Mayapur, and he's very passionate now about spreading the ethic of Gurukul around the world, and especially within our ISKCON community. He can really see, having himself lived the fruit of it, he can see how important that framing of education is for young men. And he grew up in the West. He came to Gurukul when he was 14, so practically at the cutoff. They almost didn't let him in, but he was able to stay there in Mayapur for close to a decade. And he was sharing with me, because he recently graduated, that the essence of Gurukul is that you help the young man recognize the world is not a friendly place. The world is not for your comfort. It's not been designed that way. It's in fact been designed to make you uncomfortable. It's been designed to help you recognize that you are something different from this material energy. As Srila Prabhupada said, an incompatible situation. That's how this world is designed. So everybody else in the material energy is trying to swim up against that stream of discomfort. They're trying to fight against that natural tendency for this place to be unsettling. And in that, they themselves are unsettled. In that, they themselves are frustrated constantly. So rather than swimming up the stream against discomfort, what is learned at Gurukul is how to go with the flow of discomfort, how to bring it into our lives in a healthy way so that we don't expect more than the material energy is able to give us. And from a relatively a safe but simple situation, we focus the rest of our energy on Krishna. And in that, there's a wholesome recognition of the world. There's no undue expectations of happiness where it can't come from, and relationships which can't satisfy you, having to do more work than they are able. And in that, the young man doesn't have to get into drugs, get into unhealthy sexual habits, video games, et cetera, because he has already that satisfaction of simplicity, recognizing that the world is supposed to be a little bit uncomfortable. And it's actually a good thing that I'm not totally happy with the way things are, because that's an impetus for me to approach Krishna. So it was very beautiful. Rather than teaching your kid how to find a comfortable place in the material energy, teaching your kid how to accept that the material energy can never be a comfortable place. That sounds much more wholesome. His Holiness Jayadvaita Maharaj in a class, he said, what's easier, make more money or want less stuff? And if we're all honest, we know the answer to that, although we also know maybe which direction we often try to go instead. It's much easier to want less stuff. So this is the essence of this section, Prabhupada in the purports, and also Krishna is making the point that better to embrace the challenge, seek it out rather than being hit by it. There's also in sports, if you think about it, in football, the guy that gets hit versus the guy that's hitting, same impact, same force being applied, but the guy who's applying the force and the guy who's receiving the force are having very different experiences of that collision. The guy applying the force, he's standing up and flexing his muscle and getting his face on Sports Illustrated. And the guy receiving the hit is going to the doctor afterwards. So we want to be the guy giving the hit to the material energy with our strength of sense of service to Krishna, Guru and Krishna. So we'll get to a purport from Prabhupada there on that. Where is it? Without personal service, Srila Prabhupada is saying, one would go on speculating like the impersonalists and dry speculators life after life, and would be unable to reach the final conclusion. By following the instructions of the bona fide spiritual master in conjunction with the principles of revealed scriptures, the student will rise to the plane of complete knowledge, which will be exhibited by development of detachment from the world of sense gratification. And I believe I have one more purport which emphasizes this idea. Yes, Srimad-Bhagavatam gives us this information as the supreme Vedic literature, and it was personally instructed by the Supreme Personality of Godhead to Brahmaji so that the leader of the living entities might broadcast the message to all in the universe in order to teach the supreme knowledge of Bhakti Yoga. Brahmaji in his turn instructed Narad, his beloved son, the same message of Srimad-Bhagavatam, and Narad in his turn taught the same to Vyasadeva, who again taught it to Shukadeva Goswami. Through Shukadeva Goswami's grace and by the mercy of Maharaj Parikshit, we are all given Srimad-Bhagavatam perpetually to learn the science of the absolute personality of Godhead. So the disciplic succession and the entirety of the Bhagavatam, indeed the entirety of the creation, and why Krishna is so appreciative to Lord Brahma, is because it's all oriented to help us recognize this truth, which we'll now read in these 4 chapters sloki, but we've already summarized and spoken to. This is not a comfortable place, but it's uncomfortable for a reason. Krishna has created it as uncomfortable so that the living entity has an opportunity to see our real self and the opportunity to serve him. So we can either resent that and be slowly and begrudgingly drug along through many awkward experiences till we eventually, if you can't beat them, join them, as they say, and start to go with the flow of bhakti. Or we can be like our Srila Prabhupada, who gives the penultimate example of looking for trouble in the material energy, looking for uncomfortable situations, and taking himself at the age of 70 out of Vrindavan, the Florida for spiritual retirees, Vrindavan Dham, taking himself out of Radha Damodar temple and into the streets of New York City to try to offer this Srimad-Bhagavatam to the whoever was willing to take it. And it happened to be, we know, the hippies on the Lower East Side. Srila Prabhupada was nearly stabbed. He was homeless. He had his effects stolen. Whenever he did establish a little something somewhere, instead of just sitting back comfortably and saying, okay, now enough, I can say I did it, I say I tried, I can look my spiritual master in the eye. Instead, he moved to the next place and the next place and the next place. Here in Detroit, Srila Prabhupada has the Deva Mandir, a gorgeous mansion of a former auto magnate. And he had that temple, George Harrison's house, a castle in France, a castle in Germany. Any one of these properties, any normal person would have simply sat and lived comfortably the rest of their days once they acquired. Prabhupada couldn't be bothered to spend 2 weeks in any of them, and spent a month in a hut, a grass hut in Bhubaneswar with Srila Gaura Govinda Maharaj, just because that's what he wanted. That's what he knew would allow his mission to spread, was that vigorous seeking of discomfort, not for the sake of discomfort, but for the purpose of serving Krishna. So now let me go to this chapter sloki of the second canto, chapter 9, just so that we can read it together. It comes after, it's actually an answer from Lord Brahma, who has a few questions for Krishna, and he answers him. The personality of Godhead said, so Lord Brahma asks, and I'll read the final question. Oh, my Lord, the unborn, you have shaken hands with me just as a friend does with a friend. And this is interesting. Twice we hear in this text, or in this chapter, that Krishna shook Lord Brahma's hand. So sometimes they say that's not a Vedic greeting, but who can say who's more Vedic than Vishnu? I don't know. So Vishnu shook Lord Brahma's hand to congratulate him for his excellent service and execution of tapasya. I shall be engaged in the creation of different types of living entities, and I shall be occupied in your service. I shall have no perturbation, but I pray that all this may not give rise to pride, as if I were the supreme. And then Krishna Vishnu says, so these are considered the two verses 31 and 32 are like the precursors, the prelude, so to speak. Knowledge about me as described in the scriptures is very confidential, and it has to be realized in conjunction with devotional service. The necessary paraphernalia for that process is being explained by me. You may take it up carefully. So not to be a armchair bhakta, a backseat driver, but we actually have to be engaged. We're reading, we're hearing, but we also, devotional service, Prabhupada described as an action, an activity, an effort on our part. Chapter 6, first purport of Bhagavad Gita. Spiritual life is not a kind of inertia, Prabhupada says. It's not a kind of not doing anything and somehow managing to not do anything as long as possible in Kali Yuga makes people think, wow, this guy's pretty advanced, because everyone else is running around like a chicken with their head cut off. So when you're doing nothing, it seems like you're doing something very important, action and inaction and understanding. But we in Krishna consciousness recognize it's not about not doing something. It's about not doing the wrong things. And that comes from doing the right things, engaging in Krishna service. All of me, namely my actual eternal form and my transcendental existence, qualities and activities, let all be awakened within you by factual realization out of my causeless mercy. Brahma, it is I, the personality of Godhead, who was existing before the creation, when there was nothing but myself, nor was there the material nature, the cause of this creation. That which you see now is also I, the personality of Godhead, and after annihilation, what remains will also be I, the personality of Godhead. O Brahma, whatever appears to be of any value, if it is without relation to me, has no reality. No, it is my illusory energy, that reflection which appears to be in darkness. And this is the O Brahma, please know that the universal elements enter into the cosmos and at the same time do not enter into the cosmos. Similarly, I myself also exist within everything created, and at the same time, I am outside of everything. A person who is searching after the supreme absolute truth, the personality of Godhead, must certainly search for it up to this, in all circumstances, in all space and time, and both directly and indirectly. O Brahma, just follow this conclusion by fixed concentration of mind, and no pride will disturb you, neither in the partial nor in the final devastation. We hear that Lord Brahma was worried that doing all this creation, and sometimes the devotees have, I don't want to manage, I don't want to lead, I don't want to take charge because I'm a humble devotee and I don't want any credit for anything. I don't want to get into that because I might get puffed up, I might get prideful. Well, your idea that you are too humble to do that service is itself a kind of pride. We learn from our Mula Guru, the root of our whole sampradaya, Lord Brahma, that the best way to stay protected in Krishna consciousness is to be very active in Krishna consciousness, to take a leadership role, to literally create the universe. That was how Lord Brahma felt assured in his protection from Krishna, because in executing that service, Krishna was going to protect him. And he says the same in chapter 9 of the third canto. This same section is kind of paralleled there. And Krishna says, don't worry, all the tapasya, all the penance, all the yajna, all the study, all the prayers you've offered are my mercy. And my protection from pride will also be my mercy if you stay dedicated in my service. So this, as we took from that purport, the order of the spiritual master, the indication of the Shastra, taking on those positive approaches towards Krishna and looking for the uncomfortable opportunity, the thing we don't want to do, the thing we're scared of, and recognizing that's where Krishna is going to be. That's where Krishna is going to, I'm going to need to call out to him, and he's going to feel inspired to listen to me because of the sincerity of my call. In those dark corners where we don't want to go is where we'll find the Lord. And that is the reflection, the inspiration that I took from this study of the second canto, chapter 9, for this might be my fourth time now. And I hope it did something to encourage all of you devotees. So with the last few minutes, we'll see if there are any comments or questions.
Hare Krishna, Deva Madhava Prabhu. Thank you for that really beautiful class. And there are 3 questions, so we can budget time accordingly. The first one is by Shamasaki Mataji, who writes, well, Shamasaki, who writes, wow, really loved the messages you shared today. Would you say that seeking uncomfortable situations is similar to Queen Kunti's prayers, like praying for difficult situations so that we can see Krishna in them?
Yeah, that's a beautiful parallel. You know, Kunti's asking for them, but why not seek them out? Yeah. And we're not masochistic. That's a really wonderful connection. So masochistic is like, I'm not just looking to be in pain for pain's sake. One devotee was he was going on parikrama in Vrindavan, and many of us have done that barefoot. But somehow or other, that day Prabhupada saw that he had no shoes on, and Prabhupada said to him, you know, where are your shoes? And he said, oh, Prabhupada, you know, austerity is the wealth of the Brahmanas. And Prabhupada said, there's enough austerity in this material world for itself. You go put some shoes on. And so we don't have to look for problems. We don't have to try to create them. And in our devotee society, this is also an issue, especially in the West, because we have this false renunciation idea that we basically impoverish ourselves as a kind of way out. It's a cop out for not being effective in the world. That we don't present ourselves in a very clean cut professional way. We're not on time to things. We're not, you know, it's all kind of higgledy-piggledy, as is said. And then we use that as an excuse for why people don't pay attention to us, that they don't appreciate our austerity, our simplicity, our detachment. But actually, it's a kind of messiness that we're living our life from. Whereas the drive that we're talking about today is we're really searching for opportunities to burden myself with bhakti, to make my life full of service. And Shamsaki, I mean, she could give a class on this. I'm connected to her in a few different services, and she's always volunteering for things which in my own head I'm saying, I hope nobody calls my name. I don't want to have to deal with that logistics and the coordinating. And she volunteers for these things on top of being a professional, in a lab and academia, on top of having her own sadhana, etc., and her own stuff to do in her own devotional community. There she is serving the international devotee community. Um, so she's kind of, yeah, asking the question for my sake and maybe others. But yes, this is a great kind of parallel. The request of Kunti that difficult situations come so that she can recognize Krishna. Why not seek those out and offer some service opportunities within them?
There's a follow-up question from her. Do you have any suggestions on how to stay fixed on Krishna while working through the uncomfortable experience?
Yes. Find out why that experience is uncomfortable first. So language is really powerful, and it's one, like, I had a friend, her name is Dayamai. I don't mind using her name because she's wonderful. And she's my god sister here in Detroit. We kind of joined together, and she was my only peer coming up through the Detroit temple. And there came a point in her life where she used the word bewildered for literally everything. She would just, I'm so bewildered. I'm so bewildered. I'm so bewildered. And at a point, I realized she's hiding behind that word. There's something else there's lots of things going on in her life at that time. She was going through a lot of challenges, and in avoiding facing each of those individual kind of concerns and experiences, she was using this word bewildered as a kind of glossing over. So I'm going through difficulties or challenges. We might say that in a crowd so that we don't have to, bare our heart to strangers, but ourselves, and at least with one or two Shiksha Guru types, or devotees that we can trust in confidence, guides and friends, well-wishers, we have to really get into the nitty-gritty of what are these experiences I'm having. Am I frustrated? Am I scared? Am I mad? Do I feel betrayed? Do I feel taken advantage of? What is that feeling about? And then that's something we can bring to Krishna. Krishna, I'm feeling betrayed. Krishna, I'm feeling inadequate. Krishna, I'm feeling uncertain. Please do something about that. But when we speak, Krishna, I'm feeling challenged. That's generic. The crying out hasn't gotten specific enough to really catch Krishna's attention, because it doesn't really have our attention's not there yet. We're still trying to avoid it. So my encouragement is that if you get specific on that, then the devotion is in the details, and Krishna will get specific in his revelation for you about how to address it.
And two more questions also popped up. Now we have a queue of 4 more. If you're okay,
oh, sure,
a
sure,
few
please,
minutes over.
please.
You're
Yeah, we have
comfortable
a
with
few
that?
minutes.
Okay.
I'll try to be succinct, but
All right. Next question is there an inherent danger or risk in seeking out uncomfortable situations? Perhaps it might be something more than what we can take or what would be appropriate for the situation. So what's the guiding principle to understanding healthy discomfort versus discomfort, which is ultimately a disservice either to ourselves or to the situation?
Yeah, great question. I think we've seen a lot of that in our movement. So I'm glad that you've tempered what I've said with this question comment. Well taken. And so how to navigate that, how to harmonize the two, Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra, always that we harmony. We like this word over here at the Harmony Collective. Harmony implies simultaneously one and different. And so I'm doing something a little different. I'm doing something a little uncomfortable, something maybe no one else is doing yet or I haven't done before. But at the same time, it's not out of step with the overall big picture that's wholesome for me and wholesome for my community. And the only way to know that is to have these kind of vulnerable conversations, like I just mentioned. You may not have everybody knowing your internal business and your emotions and your hopes and your aspirations and your fears and your missteps, but you got to have a few people that do. And so when you do, then it begins to become clear. Didami buddhi yogam tvam. So we hear that verse 10:10 of Bhagavad Gita, that Krishna gives in the heart that understanding by which you can come to him. But before that, he says what happens is Katayantas Chamanityam Bodayantas Parasparam, right? That the devotees are always enlightening one another and conversing about me. So when we share our personal realizations, Bodhika Prabhupada translates as preaching. So we share our hopes, our aspirations, and our fears in what we're doing in Krishna consciousness with trusted peers, then we get a healthy, Krishna acts through that person. He speaks through that other person's indication and desire. We're about to buy a restaurant over here in Ypsilanti. And 2 weeks ago, I was scared to pull the trigger on that. But after a conversation with another, dear God brother who's here in the community and helped build it up, I knew, oh, Krishna wants this. I was hiding from it. I don't want to have to manage. It's like, it's a whole headache. But after having the conversation with this devotee, I knew I wouldn't be able to look myself. I couldn't hold my japa beads. I couldn't study the Bhagavatam. I couldn't look the deities in the eye if I didn't follow through on this. And I knew that after that conversation with this devotee. So in our intimate connections with the devotees, we find that harmony of what to do when not overburdening, but not running away from or avoiding the uncomfortable circumstance of shedding our conditioning as we are engaged in Krishna's service.
Awesome, thank you. Next question comes from Ananda Prabhu, who writes, "Thank you, Deva Madhava Prabhu, for the nice presentation, kind of shaking and waking up sleeping soul presentation. On one hand, we hear to take up voluntary penance. On the other hand, we also hear that incremental steps should be taken that are practical and realistic. Otherwise, our enthusiasm may look immature or insensitive to us. Can you comment on this?"
Yeah, the dogs will bark, but the caravan will pass. So there's always going to be, there's a Chinese saying that the critic is often interrupted by the man doing the thing he's trying to say can't be done. So in the devotee society, we also have to be aware that there's a whole contingent of people who feel it's their service to prevent others from doing service. Somehow or other, that's just their MO. That's where they are, and their idea of Krishna consciousness is that to criticize is to be Krishna conscious. So it may be that your bold move and the thing that you feel very passionate about, and you've gotten some indications from some Prabhus and from some seniors about, is not seen as very good or very helpful or whatever by others. And so to allow those people to prevent us from following through on our our hopes and aspirations is not a service just in the name of keeping them pacified and not ruffling any feathers. Srila Prabhupada said, if they're not angry, you're not preaching. So there's a degree of discomfort that Krishna consciousness brings to the living entities naturally, because we're all conditioned. Even within the society of devotees, real Krishna consciousness is going to create some discomfort. I'll just give you one simple example, right? Imagine, like here at Harmony Collective, we're accustomed to having about 30 people at the Sunday feast. Now imagine somebody goes out next week, preaches their butts off, and invites 10 people to the Sunday feast, but doesn't tell anybody that those 10 people are coming, and all 10 of them show up. Now, we should all be blissful and happy that 10 brand new people have come to the Sunday feast at the Harmony Collective. But what's most devotees' mind going to be thinking? Yashoda's laughing. What's most people's minds going to be thinking? Somebody say it.
Sodom.
What about my chapati, right? They made pakora and we all get 2 pakora, but now we don't get 2 pakora because they're going to have to take the pakora. And so there's going to be a degree of discomfort in what we do that's Krishna conscious, always. Again, and I think I covered this in the previous question, we don't want to be flippant or irresponsible, definitely. But we also have to recognize that there is going to be a degree of discomfort in everything that we do, and everybody naturally wants things to remain as they are, even though as they are is not as we want them to be, because we want them to be Shuddha Bhakti level. We like Krishna comfortable. We're comfortable with Krishna comfortable, and we have to shake that. So I don't like the word balance is his own. I will save that for another day, but it's not a balance. It's you do it and you find out. You get smacked or you get patted on the back. My way of, sometimes it's Krishna through you and sometimes it's Krishna through you. So you'll figure it out. And if you're sincere, you're not going to, end ISKCON. You're not going to, offend devotees in any severe way. If you're sincere, you may make mistakes. In fact, you will make mistakes. I promise you. But if you're sincere, then those mistakes will be seen for what they are by the devotees. You'll get picked up, dusted off, and you'll continue forward.
Beautiful. Next question is from Priyacharana Mataji, who writes, "It's a delight to hear from you again. I have a question and a comment. I liked how you mentioned about having to remember that awkward situation brought us to Krishna consciousness and not take sight off the ultimate goal. My question is, Brahma first did his extensive penance, completely established his connection with Krishna before rendering the service. in our situation, I feel our situation where we do our penance and service in parallel. In this course, do we fall into the section where we are not yet there and still doing the service?
Very beautiful question. I really shows that you, however feeble it was, you accepted my invitation to consider your situation in Lord Brahma's. So I really appreciate that. So now let's consider Lord Brahma's situation. I don't want to take away the credit of him sticking with it for 1,000 years. Do we think that Lord Brahma's mind didn't tell him there's something else to do at some point in those 1,000 years? It was a tapasya because it was not easy for him either. There's this tendency in our society. I mean, it's just the conditioned tendency to make superheroes out of people. And we do it to everyone, including the great devotees. And on one side, Lord Brahma's the greatest of devotees. A more down to home example, Srila Prabhupada, right? Srila Prabhupada sat under the tree, chanted Hare Krishna, and then the Hare Krishna movement started. That's one romantic kind of storybook way to explain what happened. But there's a lot in between Prabhupada getting to that tree and chanting. And there's a lot that happened afterwards that also in the real telling of the story is understood by those that are seeing things as they are. So yes, Lord Brahma, it's great to recognize that we're in the tapasya and we're don't yet have Krishna there with us, but those same apprehensions, fears, uncertainties in our mind that are sometimes acting as roadblocks to our active service, it's not that Lord Brahma didn't face those necessarily. It's not that he didn't have those same doubts and uncertainties, but he forged ahead. He maintained his vigilance in his vow, we could say vow, his tapasya, his offering there, and Krishna rewarded him eventually. It's not that he was having antardarshan for those 1,000 years. He had to sit there and be patient and tolerant and determined, just like we need to be.
And she writes, "Thank you so much, Prabhu. Your answers don't cease to amaze me."
Krishna, Krishna.
Last question. This is from Amara Mataji. She writes, "Thank you for your wonderful sharing today. Very inspiring. To get conviction on the purpose of life, is voluntary austerity necessary?"
To get conviction on the purpose of life, is voluntary austerity necessary? I'm going to say yes. Although Prabhupada in his purport said, eventually you'll be forced into it. That's the purpose of life, is voluntary conviction. So in that way, the answer is yes. Because as Srila Bhaktisiddhanta said, real life means preaching. Real life means having a personal need to give and serve Krishna. So until that sense of conviction is present, then you aren't living real life yet. You're not there in the real sense of the experience. So what does voluntarily accepting austerity do for that? Many things. One thing I maybe haven't said yet, it demystifies the scary experience of the material energy. We've hopefully, many of us, if not all of us, have experienced this in book distribution. Sitting there thinking about book distribution, just you get a pit in your stomach, right? You start to get nauseous and it's like, oh my God, your palms may start to sweat, your hair stands up a little bit. It's like stressful to think about going up to a stranger and handing them a book and asking for a donation. But then when you actually get out there and do it, you realize, oh, it's not that bad. They just said no. Or they just ignored me and I'm still alive and Prabhupada's still there and my beads are still here and the devotees still have prasadam and that person said yes and that was totally blissful, and that's what I'm really remembering and taking away from this experience. So when we get out there and get a little bit uncomfortable, we also learn that the material energy can't do that much to us. It's not so formidable in its ability to cause us suffering. Much more powerful is the ability for Krishna's internal potency to give us pleasure than it is for Krishna's external potency to give us pain. And so we face that when we do tapasya. We learn that. We become conditioned to expect pleasure from the internal potency rather than expect, insurmountable distracting pain from the external potency.
That was the last question. Is there a brief kind of concluding statement or takeaway message you would like to share?
A verse just popped into mind, so I'll share that, and we'll conclude glorifying Giriraj, the greatest tapasi. There's a verse from Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, and he's Swapresta hastam bujaso kumarya sukanu bhuter ati bhumi vrite mahendra vajahatim apyajanam govardhaname dishitam abhishtam. That the happiness, the sukh, that Giriraj felt being lifted, ati bhumi, above bhumi, being lifted above bhumi by Krishna, was so intense that he didn't notice that Mahendra was raining down on him all of his anger, envy, and pride that he could muster. The touch of the tip of Krishna's left pinky finger, the tip of Krishna's left pinky finger, that touch was enough to distract Giriraj from all of the wrath of heaven raining down on the top of his head. So that's what happens when we are in connection with wholesome Krishna conscious tapasya. We're doing something a little tough for Krishna. Eventually, we don't even realize it's tough. We don't even know that there's a problem and that Mahendra is raining down on us all his wrath, because we've got even just the slightest touch, what to speak of a full experience of Krishna. So that's my encouragement. Look for that touch of Krishna in wherever you can find it, even if it means standing in Indra's thunderstorm, and Giridhari will take care of the rest, as Giriraj shows us.
Thank you so much, Prabhu, for that very inspiring summary of that
Gauranga.
Beautiful walkthrough. Hare Krishna, thus concludes our virtual Sunday feast. Appreciate everyone who was able to participate. And next Sunday's class will be given by His Holiness Ramapad Swami to close out the canto. Hare Krishna.
Bye.